I have lived in Beijing for over 7 years now, and during that time I have seen about maybe 10, 12 homeless people, and I would say none of the people that I saw here were actually homeless in the sense of static homeless like in the US. You didn't see them in tents or living in a car. The homeless people here that I've seen looked more like a vagabond kind of travelling homeless. Whether that's right or wrong, it's not the best word to use, vagabond, but yeah, that's kind of the homeless people that I've seen here in China. I've been in 19 Chinese cities and I've not seen any sign of homeless or a homeless problem in any of the cities I've been in. I've seen a lot of new homes, which is a whole new thing, which I'll come back to, I think. Anyway, this is me, Ian, here in Beijing. So the reason why I mention this homeless thing is because last week I seen on the news there was a number of leaders, important people, Xi Jinping and so on, in San Francisco to attend the APEC, and the city had made an effort to clean up the streets, which is a first time in many years for San Francisco. And I've actually been there. The homelessness is a little bit of a mess. It's very visible, and there's a lot of drug abuse and so on in that area. So it was a good thing that it was cleaned up, but it was a surprising thing. But it also brought a few things to mind for me. I think it's a fair thing that cities always put a little bit of extra effort in to look good if there's always a large event happening. In fact, you see it everywhere. You see it, I've seen it in Glasgow, I've seen it in London, Paris, Sydney, you name it. Sporting events, political events, you name it. They will tidy up the city, which is a good thing. Here in Beijing, we would see lots of fresh planters and flowers and buildings being illuminated and places being painted, lots of cleaning. If we had an event here, we'd see a lot of national flags and increased security. We would see army on street corners and so on. And that's what happened in San Francisco. The big difference is they cleared away a lot of the homeless people and their tents, which I guess you could call the tents their homes. So a lot of their homes just went, and I'm not sure what happened to them or where they went, but it would have been a bit traumatic for them. Now I get it, there is not a lot of sympathy for homeless people sometimes, partly because of the mess they make and the clear link to drugs and crime and mental health. But I've got to tell you, we're all one very bad decision away from being homeless or being involved in drugs or being in that situation. So I don't think anybody should be complacent, and I don't think anybody should look down on the homeless people because they have a lot of challenges. I think that's something that certainly needs to be readdressed in the modern world. Homelessness is something that really drives me insane. I just don't think there is a need for it. I'll come back to it in a second. So I grew up in Glasgow in the 80s, where drugs were ravishing the communities and impacting on people's lives in the exact same way as they are now in the US and the UK and elsewhere. But I will come back to the drug thing, because one of the outcomes of the big meeting in San Francisco was the alignment between China and America and reducing the production of fentanyl. But first, let me mention a thought I had about the homeless situation. In America, the housing supply is low. Housing inventory is at its lowest since I think 1999, and a lot of the building restrictions there make sure that there's not a lot of urgency in adding to the stock by not allowing any large volume of new housing to be built. And mortgage rates are also at their highest they've been since 2000 or so, and in the last 20 years incomes have only risen by about 80%, but home prices have risen well above 250%. So people are kind of being priced out of the market. I mean, people are competing for home ownership or even for a rental. They are absolutely priced out of the market, especially in areas where the quality of work is, where you can actually get a decent pay. And with some bad luck or a need to stay in that area for a job or a low paid, medium paid job, or for family reasons, then you can find themselves or yourself living in a homeless community, or living in their car, or worse, roughing it on the streets. So there's lots of reasons for homelessness in the US, and a big part of it is people just can't afford houses. But contrast that with what's happening here in China, which has seen I would say a housing bubble with oversupply and some course correction going on at the moment. Then it's almost the opposite situation. Now, I'm not the smartest guy on this, and I'm sure people will correct me and add some stuff on the comment section below, but there are a lot of incentives to become a house owner here in China, and ownership in China is quite high. I think it's about 85% or so, if not higher. But the speculative nature of the Chinese housing market recently, where people were buying volumes of apartments as a way to invest, has caused the boom in housing building and the subsequent collapse and slowdown of the housing situation now in China. And people have lost money, investments, and speculators have lost their cash and so on. And the governments, both provincial governments and national governments, have seen their tax incomes decline from that loss of the housing, because they get their income from charging for the land. Basically, it's a taxation of the land. Anyway, it's complex, too complex for me. But there is now less money circulating in the economy, and it will take time to recover. I remember 2007, 2008, where the Western world were collapsing. People have short memories, and I'm aware that there's a lot of stimulus and a lot of support now available to help alleviate the impact from the bursting of the housing bubble here in China. But when I stop to think about it, one country has low supply of housing and it's pricing people out of the market and into the streets, and the other country, China, has more than enough housing and is helping everyone to have a home, even if it's in the form of social housing. Like I said, I'm maybe not the smartest guy on this, and it is quite complex, and I'm probably oversimplifying it, but if you think of it that way, one country has a lot of housing and the other country is just strangling the market because it's a financial thing, then I'm not sure who's got it right, who's got it wrong. Maybe you can leave a comment in the box below. Now, the other reason why people are homeless and the streets are a mess in many cities in America is drug use, drug addiction, and I mean all kinds of drugs, and such a destructive thing, drugs. And once people fall into that spiral, then it's very difficult to come out the other side. And fentanyl has caused a massive amount of damage to American cities and beyond. And it's a good thing to see that there'll be a closer alignment between America and China to control the component parts of fentanyl and to restrict the movement of fentanyl, and that's a good thing. Got to be a good thing, an absolutely good thing. I did notice, however, that a lot of people on social media, when that announcement came through, were screaming about how China has caused this fentanyl addiction in America, and it's America's problem, but it's China's fault, and China should be held responsibility for America's addiction to fentanyl. And I did want to understand that position more, because as far as I could see, it is always the easy option to blame China, and I do vaguely remember that there was an opioids crisis, and I wanted to know if this current fentanyl crisis is one and the same thing as the opioid crisis. In fact, I didn't even know if opioids and fentanyl were the same thing. The other thing that I was interested in to understand was I do feel that American politicians and the authorities need to take some ownership of the situation with drugs in America, because to me it feels like this does not get the support, attention and money for the solutions that it actually needs to come up with to resolve that issue. In my reading and understanding, because I did dig into some of the research, I found a research paper from Harvard School of Public Health, and I just wanted to read a couple of sections of this to you because it might give you a bit of an insight into the fentanyl crisis and why it's not all China's fault. So let me just read this off my phone here, and this is about the current opioid crisis or the fentanyl crisis, but it goes back to explain this. So I'll just read it. The current opioid crisis ranks as one of the most devastating public health catastrophes of our time. It started in the mid-1990s when the powerful agent OxyContin, promoted by Purdue Pharma and approved by the FDA, the Food and Drug Administration, triggered the first wave of deaths linked to the use of legal prescription opioids. Then came a second wave of deaths from a heroin market that expanded to attract the already addicted people. More recently, a third wave of deaths has arisen from illegal synthetic opioids like fentanyl. In addition to the crushing public health burden of preventable deaths, millions more are affected by related problems involving homelessness, joblessness, truancy and family disruption, for example, blah 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 blah. Now let me add to that. One major conclusion is that the crisis represents a multi-system failure of regulation. OxyContin approval is one of, as an example. Purdue Pharma was later shown to have presented a fraudulent description of the drug as less addictive than other opioids. The profit motive of the pharmaceutical industry remains ever present, and that's just the tip of the iceberg. Post-approval, it is usually left up to industry, not regulators, to educate and advise prescribers on how to evaluate and mitigate risk. Donations from opioid manufacturers to politicians continue to influence policy decisions. In addition, a revolving door of officials leaving government regulatory agencies such as the Drug Enforcement Agency to join the pharmaceutical industry with little to no cooling off period. In other words, the opioid crisis of now, or fentanyl crisis of now, is linked back to the opioid crisis, which was Big Pharma. So there you go. It's very, very easy for everyone to say it's China's fault, and while everyone's distracted by this whole mentality of it's China's fault, then the powers that be will do nothing about actually tackling the root of the problem. And the politicians themselves, as you heard me say there, they were actually taking money, backhanders from the pharmaceutical industry in large volumes, and now that it is a massive issue, they just don't want to know. So I think the question should be asked of the politicians and the people who are running the cities. What are they going to do to help the homeless situation, the drug situation? Anyway, this is me, Ian, here in Beijing. Like I said, always researching and looking into some of the details. Very, very easy to blame China for everything. Take care of yourself, take care of your family, your community, and as always, this is me, Ian, here in Beijing, saying peace out. Catch you soon. 泪水滴满酒杯，我独自喝下这杯苦水，愿永远都是我。